First of all, it is such a pleasure to be back in St. Louis, a place that I've spent a lot of time during my childhood. My parents were divorced, and my dad lived in Kansas City, but one of my favorite aunts lived here in St. Louis. So when I was old enough to be on the train by myself, my mother would come to St. Louis to visit with my aunt, and I would spend some time with my aunt and then take the train on to Kansas City. And I will take a privilege, if you will just bear with me a second. I am so delighted to have my cousin here, Maddie Christine Moore. Would you just stand up? Kathy, Franklin, and Sam, please stand up. They are all part of my family. Thank you so much for coming. And
mention that she's a former FBI.
Yes, she is. Kathy is a former FBI agent. Yes, she worked for the FBI. And finally, Mr. Seay, this is just such an honor to be here. I met you several years ago at the beginning of the African American Advisory Board, and I just applaud you, and I'm humbled by your leadership and the great example that you've set for all of us here. So let's give him another hand. And also, Dr. Bernard. I was at NIA yesterday, and I was looking for you, and they told me you were out of town. So I'm glad that I get a chance to see you here. So welcome and thank you. I'm going to start off with a disclosure. You can see I am not hired by anybody. So I have no research support and not paid by anyone. I'm a volunteer, and so I am objective here. As I looked at this title, Take Charge of Your Alzheimer's Disease Risk, Overcome Cultural Myths, the development of this title actually came from two principles that my mother taught me when I was growing up. Among other things, she said, take charge of your life and face your fears. And for so many people, Alzheimer's disease is something that they are afraid of, and often they go into denial about, and they don't deal with it. So I chose this title with that in mind, that we must take charge of our Alzheimer's disease risk and overcome some myths, cultural myths, that are really hurting us. She also told me that one person can make a difference, Mr. Seay, as you have, and make each day count as you have too, as well, and it's worthy advice. Alzheimer's disease, as you've heard, has been through my family. It's a stunning, irrevocable event when the person you love, the keeper of all of your precious memories and childhood stories, those that can just be shared between the two of you, like those between spouses, or a parent and a child, or a sister and a brother, or an uncle and an aunt. When all of those memories are lost in the plaques and tangles of Alzheimer's disease, it destroys much more than memories. For children, for grandchildren, if they lose a grandmother, as I did to Alzheimer's disease, you lose a sense of your history and traditions. There's so many times I wish I could have asked my grandmother about things, and I couldn't because she had Alzheimer's disease during or senility, as they called it, most of my life. And so there's a lot more that is lost. And there's a lot of grief. If you can just imagine your spouse not recognizing you anymore or remembering those special times that you had with your children, that's something that makes you very sad. And so you have to really protect your brain by reaching down to the very pit of your soul to find the inner strength to keep on going. And it reminded me of a quotation from an African mystic, Brother Ishmael Tete from Ghana. And he said, "Nothing happens for nothing in God's plan. The condition that caused us pain was the same condition that led us to discover our inner strength." That condition that he was talking about was the condition of 9 to 15 million Africans chained together 2 by 2, crammed into the hull of a human cargo ship for the long and treacherous journey across the Atlantic during what was known as the infamous time of slavery and the Middle Passage. But let me tell you something. It took me a long time to understand something. It was an epiphany after visiting Ghana and seeing slave castles, 2 of them. And I turned to my husband and I said, "You know, we are survivors of the best of the very best." They had to have been. And they knew they had the inner strength. And so I'm telling you today that it's in our DNA. Many of us, like Chris and I, are only 3 generations away from slavery. And sometimes we forget how very strong we are. And the reason I'm taking the time to deal with this now is because I want us to really think about where we came from, and we have an obligation as survivors, as descendants, to take better care of ourselves. Time is running out for us because in the interim, though for many African Americans in this room, you know, our ancestors came from a very hard life, many of them, in Africa. And we got here, we've come here, and we've gotten a little soft, and we've picked up some bad habits. And so we need to get rid of those bad habits. Not tomorrow, not next week, not next month, not next year, but right now. We need to get moving, and we need to take care of ourselves. Let's talk about Alzheimer's disease, the symptoms and the myths. The Alzheimer's Association, along with the American Association of Geriatric Psychiatry and the American Geriatric Society, reached a consensus statement, put together a consensus statement in about 1997, I believe it was. It said, physicians may fail to recognize the initial signs of dementia, perpetuating myths and fallacies. Oh, it's just old age, or just senility. And this is the most important part of this statement. Alzheimer's disease and aging are not synonymous. Alzheimer's disease and aging are not synonymous. And many of us and many of our families fall victim to physicians who will write it off very easily, some of the symptoms, and our loved ones don't get treated as quickly as they need to be. Dementia. I hear so often from people who'll say to me, "Oh, the doctor said that my mother had dementia." What does that mean? Dementia is just a name that describes a group of disorders that kill brain cells. Alzheimer's disease is the most common form of dementia. Vascular dementia is second, and mixed dementia is third. There are more than 100 different kinds of dementias, but these are the top 3 here. And what happens, the behavior for each and every one of these is very similar. What happens is the person gradually loses their memory, because remember, the brain cells are being destroyed. They slowly are not anymore able to do the things that they regularly used to do. They can no longer learn. In many cases, they can't communicate. And in my mother's case, in the end, she could not swallow, which is something that the things that we take so much for granted, just being able to comb our hair or brush our teeth. But even more than that, it destroys what makes each of us so unique, and that's our personality, our sense of humor, whatever personality we have. And that's something that is not normal aging. It's abnormal aging. Alzheimer's is not normal aging. Let's talk about normal aging. Normal aging is my 97 or our 97-year-old aunt. She turned 97 about a week and a half ago. And this picture up at the top to my right was her getting flowers. Those are flowers, in fact, that I sent her for her birthday. But the picture down below, she was 93 years old. Now, our aunt, I have to tell you, she was living alone for a long time, and she was still driving, though she shouldn't be. Everybody in Racine, Wisconsin knew that little white car. And we tried to tell her, Aunt Corinne, you need to stop, we need to get somebody to help you. But she fell about 2 years ago, summer of 2007, and she cracked 3 ribs. And this shows you how tough a lady she is. She was still ready to go to an NAACP convention. And Chris and I were saying, no, you cannot do this. But we finally convinced her, thank you, that it's my allergies, that she needed to get some help. So we started having some caregivers come into the house. She got better, all right, but we describe her as, let's put this right here, thank you. We describe her as a 60-year-old trapped in a 97-year-old body, because she still thinks that she can do the things that she used to do. Now, she is not alone, because I also took care of her sister, who died at 97 after a second bout of stomach cancer. So at least on my dad's side, we have some pretty good genes. Also, normal aging, I did the wrong thing. Normal aging is their first cousin Robert Danner. He died last year at 103 years old. I remember he lived in Memphis, Tennessee, and I would go to see him. And he was in his late 90s, and he was, one summer, July, and he was mowing the lawn himself with a push mower, no less, okay? He was still driving, too, into his late 90s and probably shouldn't have been. This is what you call normal aging. Normal aging is also these folks at the 2009 Philadelphia Centenarian celebration. There are more than 400 centenarians in the city of Philadelphia. The oldest is Anna Lois Henderson at 109, and Lazer Asman, 104. He's the oldest man. Now, those are people who are examples of normal aging. Abnormal aging is Alzheimer's disease, and it truly is. It's not an exaggeration to say It's a race against time. It's because age is a risk factor for Alzheimer's disease. And around the world, we're aging, not just in the U.S., but around the world. The U.S. Census Bureau just, published this summer in July a new publication saying that estimated 506 million people around the world who are 65 years old and older. And by the year 2040, there will be 1.3 billion people who are 65 years old and older. This has significant public policy ramifications, and my concern is that I'm not sure that our own government and many governments around the world are prepared to deal with issues of taking care of this many people who are aging, who are elderly. And in just the next 10 years, according to this report, by the year 2030, older people will outnumber children. That's a sobering thought here. Dementia is also growing. Alzheimer's disease, there's been a spike. The Alzheimer's Disease International, which you heard is an international federation of Alzheimer associations around the world, published this report, an update to a 2005 report about global dementia. They estimated 35 million people are living with dementia around the world. That's a 10% increase over the 2005 figure, which was a little more than 24 million. And those numbers are expected to double every 20 years. Here in the United States, there are 5.3 million cases of Alzheimer's disease, one new case every 7 seconds. And I think I've read 1 in 8 baby boomers will also have Alzheimer's disease because we're aging so rapidly. The thing that really gets me in the pit of my stomach are the 500,000 people who have what's called early onset Alzheimer's disease. There's late onset, post-65. About 10% of people 65 and older have Alzheimer's disease. Age is a risk factor. But for the early onset, these are people who are under 65, many of them in their 40s and 50s, who are in the prime time of their careers. I've seen families who have children, and suddenly these folks don't qualify for Medicare. And it is devastating to families, and it happens to all kinds of people at every single socioeconomic level. And so we must find something, some cures for this disease. It's an expensive disease, too. Medicare and Medicaid, direct and indirect cost, as well as the cost to businesses. Business costs, lost productivity, absenteeism, all of that figures into $148 billion is what it costs per year. And by the year 2030, we're looking at $400 billion. That is a lot of money. Of course, what cannot be really, truly calculated are the financial, emotional, and physical cost of caregiving. Many of caregivers are spending 24/7 taking care of their loved one. They're lost, some of them are lost to business and to lost employment because they have to stay home and take care of their loved one. It's estimated, health economists estimate, that they put 8.5 billion hours into care at a value of $83 billion. Now, I used to say that Alzheimer's disease was an equal opportunity disease. Didn't matter who you were, former president, boxer, Rita Hayworth, famous actress, it just didn't matter, as well as plain folks. I thought that when my mother was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, because it happened about the same time that the governor of the state of Pennsylvania had also been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. So I used to think it knows no color, racial barriers, or anything like that. That was until the Alzheimer's Association published this document, African Americans and Alzheimer's Disease, the Silent Epidemic. And what this was a review of published research studies, each of which could stand individually on its own and was valuable. But it was only when we looked at the total and evaluated the total research and the messages that were coming from these studies did we realize that Alzheimer's disease is an epidemic in the African American community. The estimates are from 14% up to 100% higher than in the larger community. If you have a family member of the first degree, like a mother, as I did, then your risk is almost 44% higher with the first generation family member. If you have a spouse with Alzheimer's disease, it's almost 20%. And this is the one that gets me. There may be different genetic factors at work with African Americans than in the larger community. And if that's not enough to get your attention, I don't know what is. And that's why what Mr. Seay has done is so important. We cannot sit back and not be involved in research, because scientists right now are studying white people. And my goal here is to encourage more of us to be involved so that we know we have some answers to what is happening in our own community. We have to do that. We cannot continue to put our heads in the sand and say, oh, this doesn't exist, or she just has Alzheimer's disease, or anything like that. We need to find out what is killing members of our families, members of our community. One of the other things that happens is that African Americans are diagnosed much later into the disease. Part of it is misinformation. We have a huge challenge to get the right information out to our community. It's not just old age. It doesn't happen, but that's what so many people, I had a meeting this afternoon and we talked about that with the satellite group, and we talked about a lot of people are still thinking it's just old age. It is not. Fear and denial are just so huge. I know people who say, oh, I would just kill myself if it was Alzheimer's disease. And it's that kind of fear that's destroying our folks. And stigma, oh, my sister's not crazy. And that's what we, as a community, tend to really fear, that other people will think our loved one is crazy. Well, they're not. And we should all be able to say, it's not, it's a disease. They didn't do anything to get it. It's not their fault, and we have to move beyond that. Age, of course, is a risk factor, but there are other disease conditions that help contribute to the higher prevalence of Alzheimer's disease in African Americans. One is hypertension. We are predisposed, more of us, to hypertension, high cholesterol, and diabetes, all of which lead to vascular disease and vascular dementia. Marilyn Albert, a famous, fairly well-known researcher down at Johns Hopkins, wrote a book with her husband. It said, "Keep your brain young." And she used to say at board meetings, John, I think you remember, what's good for your heart is also good for your head. And so, therefore, we're going to talk a little bit later about what you can do about these conditions. You know, when I look back now and compare what was happening with Alzheimer's research 20, 30 years ago to what's happening now, you've heard of the golden age of Rome. Well, this is the golden age of discovery when it comes to Alzheimer's research. My mother was diagnosed in 1988. She was a brilliant woman. She worked at Morehouse College. She was a mentor to thousands of young African Americans who turned out to be leaders for this country. Leaders like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and Maynard Jackson, the former mayor of Atlanta. And yet, for all that she did, brilliant woman, she got Alzheimer's disease. And her mother, my grandmother, 26 years before her, had what they call senility, and it was most probably Alzheimer's disease. And then, just 2 years after her death, her brother was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. And then her sister was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. And she lived to be the sister, my Aunt Vanetta, lived for 10 years with Alzheimer's. And yet, going back again to this whole thing about denial and fear, Tony Phelps, who works at NIA, one of the researchers at NIA, said to me, with your family history, we need your family to participate in the twin study. All it meant was to collect some blood, a vial of blood, so that they could compare these twins. I had one, they were fraternal twins, one with Alzheimer's and the other one without. My cousin Brenda in Washington said, sure, because we want to know. My cousins in Tennessee, they said, oh no, it's just Alzheimer's. And 2 of them were nurses. I mean, so even in my family, I'm battling the same thing that we face in the general population. But the point also that I want to make is that 21 years ago, there were no therapies. I would have killed if I could find anything to help my mother. And there wasn't anything back then. And so when I look at where we are today, we are light years ahead. When I look at research, they're doing, molecular biology advances and genetics advances. And one of the things that researchers are doing today is looking at biomarkers. What is a biomarker? It's a physical trait or characteristic that measures the disease progress. And just a few months ago, a team of researchers announced that they had a new test to determine the early stages of Alzheimer's disease. And they could do it by measuring the tau and beta amyloid proteins in spinal fluid. Now, tau and beta amyloid are 2 of the hallmarks of Alzheimer's disease. It means earlier diagnosis. And again, if we can catch this disease at its earliest stage, before it really truly expresses itself, then researchers can start working on therapies to treat it at its earliest stage so it doesn't advance as quickly without the research. Now, these researchers were part of the Alzheimer's Disease Neuroimaging Initiative, which is a partnership that is supported principally by the National Institute on Aging, NIH, and both some private sector, public sector funding through the NIH Foundation. This is really exciting stuff. Imaging. Now, everybody knows about MRIs, but you know, it used to be that back 21 years ago, when my mother was diagnosed and she had an autopsy, that was the only way that you could know for certain, you know, whether or not the person had Alzheimer's disease. But today, you've got such great imaging that you can actually see the disease in a live person's brain. Magnetic resonance imaging, MRI, was what was used 21 years ago in diagnosing my mother, that plus a mini-mental state exam. But the MRIs of today are nothing like the MRIs that were there 21 years ago. Positron emission tomography, or PET scan. They're doing that right here, along with a compound that is a tracer compound called Pittsburgh Compound B, or PIB, that actually lets you see the amyloid deposits in the brain before there are symptoms of Alzheimer's disease. That's so totally exciting, because here again, if you understand that the disease process is already there, then it gives us an opportunity, gives researchers an opportunity to start working on therapies to slow the disease down. How many people remember the Human Genome Project? You remember that? About 13 years, I think, the project, they were working on this project. And the whole idea was to be able to catalog 20,000 to 25,000 genes in the human DNA. And guess what? In the first genome-wide association study, they identified 2 genes for late-onset Alzheimer's. Before this, there was only 1 that had been identified, and it's so exciting to see that. One is CLU and PICOM. Did I say that right, John? They've discovered that those 2 may increase the risk of late onset Alzheimer's disease. And they're also working on researching 13 other genes. This is truly exciting. You can understand now why I said it's the golden age of discovery. Prior to that, earlier, we knew that early onset Alzheimer's genes, there were 2 of them. The amyloid precursor gene protein, APP, and presenilin 1 and 2. Now, who knows what presenilin is? All right, you're wondering, what is presenilin? Presenilin is important in developing the amyloid protein, which is a hallmark of the disease. And so when you see these three genes in families, when they're present, it's the familial form of Alzheimer's disease. And I have seen families, early onset families, where it is totally, and John has too, where it's totally gone through the families. I saw one young lady who testified on Capitol Hill. She was maybe early 30s, and she was crying, and she said, I don't know if I have it or not, because she had already lost aunts and uncles, and her mother had the disease. And it was so very sad. The ApoE4 was the only confirmed late onset Alzheimer's gene. So it's so exciting now to know that we have 2 more that researchers can continue to work with. Now, immunotherapy, most of us think about vaccines for infectious diseases. But today, researchers are looking at vaccines with antibodies that remove amyloid in the brain. A number of years ago, Elon had the first vaccine that was so very exciting. I just knew at that, I was so hopeful that this was going to be the answer. It got into phase 3 clinical trials, but the trials were stopped because a few of the people developed some problems in their brain. And it did clear the amyloid, okay? It did do that for a number of them, but it also had inflammation. They had inflammation in the brain, so the trial was stopped. Second generation vaccines have been started. There are some potential side effects that affect the autoimmune system. There is a third generation vaccine that is also on the horizon that uses amyloid aggregates that don't cause, supposedly, the autoimmune problem. So we'll have to keep watching that. So, I can't change my age, and wouldn't want to, frankly, and I can't change my family history, but what we can do is manage the risk factors for Alzheimer's disease, keeping your brain young. First thing, stop smoking. If you're a smoker, consult your doctor about a smoking cessation program. Smoking increases the risk for lung, bladder, and pancreatic cancer, heart attack, hypertension, and stroke. So how many more things do we have to list? Smoking is a bad deal. We need to stop. Get an annual physical. Let me see the hands of folks who get annual physicals. Tell the truth. Tell the truth. It's important. One of my best friends, a physician, family physician, said, the best disease is one that the doctor finds early. So here again, don't be an ostrich, don't put your head in the sand. Go and get an annual checkup. Hypertension. It's a risk for stroke and vascular dementia. So take your medicine. You know, there are people, I was talking with somebody today who said, you know, I hear people that say, I don't take any medicine. Well, I'm one who doesn't take any medicine. Knock wood. I don't take any because I don't have any illnesses. My doctor says that I'm so healthy. And I'm so fortunate because everybody in my family has hypertension on both sides. But so far, so good. And if I did have it, I told her, if I do have it, I want to take the medicine because it protects my brain. Take the salt shaker off the table. You know, years ago, I guess it must have been back in the 80s, one of my coworkers said to me, you know, you're a pretty smart lady, so why you're still using salt? And it was an eye-opener. I said, you're right. And I stopped using salt then. Right then and there, back in the 80s. And I remember I went home that evening and we were having corn. And my kids said, we're not using salt. They said, we can't eat this. I said, well, yeah, we're going to have to because we're not doing salt. And today my children eat corn without the salt. So even we need, again, break some of the bad habits that we have and develop healthier habits. Cholesterol. Risk for heart disease and heart attack. Take your medicine. Watch your diet. Because the heart pumps about 20% of the blood to the brain. Well, it can't get there if you've got clogged arteries. Brain cells die when they're deprived of food and oxygen. So having a good diet is really important, and we're going to talk about that in a moment. Diabetes. There's a growing evidence of a link between diabetes and Alzheimer's because it does cause vascular disease. Diabetes increases the stroke risk and the risk of vascular dementia. In my husband's case, it's a family history of diabetes, both of his parents, so it wasn't going to skip him. But we are trying to manage it with diet and making sure that he gets the exercise and takes the medicine. So take your medicine and get serious about diet and exercise to control it. Depression, cognitive decline risk. There is a big link between diabetes and also depression. So if you're feeling down, whether you're young or you're older, don't ignore the depression. Don't say, well, I'll come out of it. Get help for it because it's important for your health. All right, there are some choices that we can make. Now, whose cell phone is that? I went to a funeral. The past 3 Saturdays, I've had funerals to attend, and a cell phone went off in the middle of the eulogy on Saturday, and the pastor said, that better be Jesus on the phone. Okay, so, okay, all right, okay. Watch your weight. A study, many studies have found that those who are obese in midlife are twice as likely to develop dementia. Those with high cholesterol and high blood pressure, 6 times the risk of dementia. I know you like McDonald's, and some of the other Kentucky Fried and the like. That's one of the habits that you can break. Not tomorrow, next week, but now if you want to live. Because those saturated fats do clog your arteries and raise your risk for Alzheimer's disease. Choose grilled, grilled foods and baked foods, okay? You can get used to it. And olive oil, love it. You add some herbs to that olive oil with a piece of bread, and it is out of this world. It beats butter any day, okay? And it's much healthier for you. Increase heart healthy foods. What is a brain healthy diet? It's a diet that's low in fat and cholesterol. It's a diet that's high in antioxidants. It reduces the risk of heart disease, stroke, and diabetes. So, this is what we do at my house. Dark-skinned fruits and vegetables. They have the highest levels of antioxidants. So, how many people are from the South here? Okay. You may have to teach some of your friends how to cook kale and spinach and develop a liking for broccoli and collard greens because they are good for you. They are high in antioxidants. Fruits. Every morning at my house, we have strawberries and blueberries and blackberries when they're not too expensive. Raspberries, plums, oranges, red grapes, all of those are really good for you. Cold water fish. My husband never used to like fish. Well, since his diabetes is ramped up, and he never ate vegetables, but he does now. And so, you can think that maybe you won't like it, but you would. Cold water fish like salmon and trout, tuna, halibut, and mackerel. They are high in omega-3 fatty acids. Nuts, not the whole can. Not the whole can. And I'll tell you, I love nuts. I really do. I love almonds, I love pecans, and I love walnuts. But you have to commit to yourself that you're only going to have a little bit, okay? And that can be your special treat every day. Avoid excess alcohol. Now we know already what alcohol in excess will do to the brain anyway. But it also may increase your risk of cancer. Moderation has some effects, some benefits to the heart. And I recently learned it's not just red wine, it's also white wine now that has benefits. Now, what is moderation? We all like to make up our own numbers about what is moderation. And you know what? The glasses, have you noticed that the glasses, the wine glasses, are bigger now? Resist the temptation to fill that glass up. Because moderation is 1 to 2 drinks per day for men. They say 1 for women. That's a 12-ounce beer, 5 ounces of wine, and 1.5, that's a little amount, of 80 proof, that's right, Sam, 80 proof spirits. I see you over there. And so that's what you have to do. I can't stress to you enough how the importance of maintaining a good social network. Interaction is a boost for brain vitality. Supportive, personal relationships really do help you protect the brain. I have a friend that I'm very, very concerned about, and it's because she is becoming a hermit. And I've also noticed that she's having some memory problems. I don't know if it's depression, and I told her when I get back, we're gonna have to talk about that. Because if you see a change in a person's normal behavior, it's time to talk to them as a friend and say to them, I think you need to get out more. You know, I think you need to check with your doctor on what's happening. Stay physically active. Pump up your brain. That's exactly. Do those weights, boy. Walking, bicycling, line dancing. How many people do yoga? Not many. Let me tell you something about yoga. Yoga is great. It makes you more flexible. It helps you with your balance. But most of all, it's so good for your head. So think about yoga. What you're doing need not be strenuous. Just make it a routine. Challenge your brain. Yes, do crossword puzzles. Go and see plays. Do regular puzzles. And learn a foreign language. My husband said that every country I went to, I was always trying to speak the language. And I will continue to do that, too, because I believe it's good for my brain. So think about doing that. There are 77 million Americans who were born between 1946 and 1964, known as baby boomers. We're the largest generation that will face Alzheimer's in our future. We can have a future with Alzheimer's disease, but we've got to act now. And in closing, I want to leave you with this message. If we act now, Maureen Reagan was a member of our board of directors of the Alzheimer's Association. And she used to say, I want us to be the last generation to live without hope. And we can be if we take it seriously. Thank you very much.